In the dim recesses of a war room, far from the eyes of the world, a single object lay undisturbed for days. Not a weapon, not a map, but a letter. A simple envelope sealed with dark red wax, stamped with an emblem few outside a select circle had ever seen. The words on it were sparse but heavy. For his eyes only. No signature, no sender's name, just those 4 chilling words, promising secrets buried deep and consequences unimaginable. This letter was not meant for idle reading. It was meant for Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a man who, by fate or design, had become the fulcrum upon which the fragile balance of an entire nation teetered. For days this envelope sat untouched on a cluttered wooden desk in that shadowy room. Around it, papers shuffled, phones rang, voices whispered in urgency, but no hand reached out to break the seal. Why? What was inside that letter that made a man known for decisive action hesitate? What silent force held him back from opening it? Captain Traoré was no stranger to danger. He had stared down bullets and betrayals alike. He had risen through the ranks not just on the strength of his sword arm, but through a fierce belief in justice, sovereignty, and the right of his people to chart their own destiny. He was the leader of a country caught in the crossfire of ancient wounds and modern power struggles, a nation torn between insurgencies, foreign interests, and internal fractures that cut deep. Yet here he was, frozen in the quiet chaos of that room, staring at an unopened letter that carried more weight than any battlefield command. To understand the gravity of that moment, we must understand what the letter represented. This was no ordinary correspondence. It was a message encoded with the power to alter the course of history, perhaps to save a country from the brink or condemn it to ruin. But Captain Traoré, despite his resolve, resisted. Was it fear, distrust, or a calculated decision born from years of watching friends turn into foes and allies into shadows? What if the letter was a trap? A poison hidden in ink and paper, designed by unseen hands to dismantle everything he had fought for? The war room was silent except for the faint buzz of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of conflict beyond the walls. Outside, the streets simmered with unrest, the lives of millions hanging by threads thinner than a whisper. Inside, the envelope waited. It was a paradox, power in a fragile vessel, truth hidden beneath layers of suspicion. This letter was the embodiment of a question that has haunted leaders through the ages. When is silence more dangerous than truth? When does the act of reading a message become a greater risk than ignoring it? In this fragile moment, Captain Traoré faced a choice that no leader should ever have to make. He had to decide if the weight of the unknown was a burden he could bear, if the risk of uncovering a hidden betrayal outweighed the risk of blindness to it. But what if the real danger wasn't the letter itself? What if it was the silence that surrounded it? The silence of unanswered questions, of doubts unspoken, of fears too deep to confront. Because in a world ruled by invisible forces, where whispers of foreign influence move like ghosts through halls of power, the truth can become the most dangerous weapon of all. It can shatter alliances, expose lies, and ignite wars. This is a story not only about a letter, but about the power of silence, the weight of suspicion, and the fine line between courage and hesitation. This is the story of Ibrahim Traoré's refusal to read a letter, and the consequences that unfolded when that choice was made. A tale of loyalty and betrayal, of leadership tested in fire, and of a nation caught in the crosshairs of history. A story that asks us to consider the very nature of trust. In times of crisis, who do we believe? The messenger, the message, or the silence between the lines? Imagine for a moment yourself in Captain Traoré's place. The fate of millions rests on your shoulders. A letter arrives, promising answers but also carrying unknown threats. To open it is to risk everything. To ignore it is to gamble with the future. What would you do? Would you tear open the seal and confront the truth, no matter how dark? Or would you set it aside, hoping that some secrets are better left unread? Because sometimes the heaviest burden is not the truth itself, but the silence that guards it. This is the story of a letter that changed everything, a letter that should have been read sooner but wasn't. And in that silence, a nation's fate was sealed. What would you have done if you were in his place? Read it, or let history decide. To understand why a single letter could hold such devastating power, we must first understand the man who refused to read it and the world he inhabited. Ibrahim Traoré was not born into power. He was born into a land scarred by struggle, a country long defined by resistance and resilience. Burkina Faso, a nation in the heart of West Africa. Its name means Land of Honest People, a proud title that belies the turbulence etched into its history. For decades, this land has been both battleground and beacon, a symbol of the fight against colonialism, corruption, and the relentless grip of foreign influence. Traoré's childhood was shaped by shadows of conflict. He grew up in a country wrestling with its identity, caught between the legacy of French colonial rule and the fierce desire for self-determination that had fueled generations before him. His early years were marked by stories of heroes like Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader who dared to imagine a new Africa, one free from imperial chains only to be cut down in a violent coup. Sankara's dream lived on in whispers, in memories, in the spirit of a people unwilling to bow. Traoré absorbed these stories not as distant history, but as a call to action. As a young man, he joined the military, a decision that would forever entwine his fate with the fragile stability of his country. Rising through the ranks, he distinguished himself not just as a soldier, but as a thinker. A man who understood that the battles of today were fought not only with weapons, but with ideas, with loyalty, with trust. By 2022, the stakes had never been higher. Burkina Faso was facing an existential crisis. Terrorism had seeped into its borders, with armed groups exploiting ethnic divisions and the porousness of the Sahel region. Violence spread like wildfire, devastating communities and igniting cycles of revenge and despair. At the same time, foreign powers, old colonial masters and new geopolitical players alike, jockeyed for influence. They offered aid, intelligence, and military support, but also imposed strings that threatened to undermine Burkina Faso's sovereignty. The country's leaders found themselves trapped in a web of competing interests, where every alliance risked betrayal. Amid this chaos, Ibrahim Traoré emerged as a fierce critic of imperialism. His speeches, laced with defiance and hope, echoed through the streets and the airwaves. He called for unity, for self-reliance, for an Africa that would reclaim its destiny without bowing to foreign agendas. But leadership came at a cost. Behind closed doors, Traoré surrounded himself with a tight circle of trusted advisors, men and women who shared his vision, but also understood the precariousness of their position. Among them was Commissaire Cabaret, a loyal but pragmatic figure, a man whose calm exterior masked a mind constantly weighing threats seen and unseen. It was Cabaret who first delivered the mysterious letter, arriving on an unassuming afternoon in a locked briefcase. No courier, no explanation, just the sealed envelope with its ominous warning. The letter's arrival disrupted the fragile calm. Traoré recognized the significance immediately. Such a message could only come from the highest echelons of power, perhaps from allies, perhaps from enemies cloaked in friendship. Its contents could hold intelligence that might prevent disaster, or it could be a calculated trap designed to fracture his government from within. For days, the envelope remained on his desk, a silent specter in the room where decisions about life and death were made. But the hesitation to open it was not born of weakness. It was born of a deep mistrust, forged in the crucible of history, because the wounds of past betrayals ran deep in Burkina Faso's political fabric. Flashbacks linger in the collective memory. Patrice Lumumba, the Congolese leader whose dreams of freedom were extinguished by foreign powers colluding in shadows. Thomas Sankara, whose revolutionary fire was snuffed out by those who feared his vision. Leaders undone not by external enemies, but by those they once called brothers. Traoré had seen how alliances crumble, how loyalty can shift like sand beneath your feet. The letter was not just a message, it was a test. Would he read it and risk poisoning the fragile trust within his government? Or would he let it lie, hoping silence might shield him from betrayal? Meanwhile, tension mounted beyond the war room walls. Across Burkina Faso, rumors swirled, loyalties wavered, and power struggles intensified. Provinces simmered with unrest, fueled by fear and manipulation. Whispers of coups, secret meetings, and foreign interference circulated in hushed tones. Traoré's inner circle was strained to breaking point. Commissaire Caboret urged caution, warning that the letter might contain intelligence crucial to uncovering plots that threatened to destabilize everything. Others feared it was a distraction, a psychological weapon meant to sow doubt and division. The envelope became a symbol, a silent representation of the complex web of trust and betrayal that defined African leadership in the modern era. It was a question of survival. Can a leader trust the messages delivered in the shadows? Can he rely on loyalty when betrayal lurks so close? And in the waiting, the unanswered question loomed larger. Because in politics, as in war, indecision can be as deadly as the enemy's bullet. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's refusal to open that letter was not just a moment of hesitation. It was a moment that captured the paradox of leadership in a world where truth is often cloaked in secrecy and silence can be both protection and poison. This is the stage on which the drama would unfold. A nation caught between chaos and hope, a leader caught between trust and suspicion, and a letter that held the power to change everything. What would happen when that silence finally broke? What price would be paid for waiting too long? What secrets did the letter hold, and who stood to gain from its delay? These questions hung heavy in the air, setting the tone for a story of intrigue, loyalty, and betrayal that would test the very fabric of a nation. Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat behind his desk, eyes fixed on the sealed envelope that refused to yield its secrets. The crimson wax gleamed under the harsh light, a stark contrast to the cold gray walls around him. That small, unassuming letter had become the epicenter of a growing storm. A storm not just outside the walls of power, but inside the very soul of his government. For Traoré, this was no ordinary hesitation. It was a reckoning. In the world of politics, trust is the currency that buys loyalty, but in his world, trust was a double-edged sword, sharp, dangerous, and often wielded by those with hidden agendas. His advisors gathered around him, their voices low but urgent. "Sir," Commissaire Caboret began, his tone measured but firm, "this letter could be strategic intelligence, information that could prevent an attack or expose a plot against you and the government. Opening it might be our best chance to act before it's too late." But another voice, colder, more cynical, cut through the room. "Or," said the Minister of Internal Security, "it could be a trap. Western intelligence agencies are known to use misinformation to destabilize regimes. We must be cautious. One false move and our enemies will be inside these walls." Traoré's gaze remained fixed on the letter. In his mind, 1,000 scenarios played out, some hopeful, some terrifying. The letter could be a lifeline, offering clarity in a fog of uncertainty. But it could also be a weapon, designed to fracture his council, to pit friend against friend, to erode the fragile unity that held his government together. The debates continued behind closed doors, but outside, the air grew thick with suspicion. Council members whispered in corners, alliances shifted, and the seeds of distrust took root. Leaders who once stood united now glanced sideways with suspicion. Phone calls were shortened, meetings held in secret. The letter, though unread, was already reshaping the political landscape. In the days that followed, small leaks of information began to surface. Intelligence that seemed inconsistent, contradictory. Was this the work of foreign agents or insiders with their own agendas? The line blurred. Traoré found himself haunted by the ghosts of the past. Leaders like Thomas Sankara, who had trusted too easily, who had fallen victim to betrayals cloaked in friendship. The bitter knowledge that sometimes the greatest enemy was the one closest to you. And so, the unopened letter became a symbol, not just of what it contained, but of the fear and doubt that gripped those who governed in shadows. But what if that fear was itself a tool? What if the hesitation to open the letter was exactly what his enemies wanted? As the internal council fractured, violence began to erupt in the provinces. Communication lines faltered, intelligence reports were delayed or disappeared altogether. The country's fragile stability began to unravel. Yet Traoré remained resolute. He ordered the letter held back, a decision that would ripple through the days ahead. But as he wrestled with his doubts, whispers of betrayal grew louder. One night, in a quiet corner of the capital, a meeting was held. Secret, urgent, filled with voices trembling with desperation and ambition. The Minister of Defense, once a loyal ally, was seen speaking with figures unknown, plotting in the shadows. Was this the beginning of a coup? Was the letter the key to unraveling a plot? Or had the plot already begun, hidden beneath the silence? Meanwhile, a shadowy figure was spotted delivering another envelope, this time to a foreign embassy, a silent thread in the tapestry of intrigue. Back in the war room, tensions between Traoré and Commissaire Kaboré reached a breaking point. "Sir, if we delay any longer, we risk losing control," Kaboré warned. "The letter could contain the very proof we need to stop the traitors." But Traoré's silence was his answer. The room grew cold with unspoken fears, and in that silence, the question lingered. Was the real enemy outside the walls or inside them? This chapter of doubt and distrust would define the path ahead, because sometimes the hardest battles are not fought on battlefields, but within the corridors of power, where loyalty is tested and the line between friend and foe fades into shadow. What would you have done, watching as the web of suspicion tightened? Would you have risked reading the letter or guarded your trust against the unknown? Because in the end, hesitation can be as dangerous as betrayal. As the days grew heavier, the fragile threads holding Burkina Faso together began to fray, stretched thin by suspicion and unseen hands pulling at the seams. The unopened letter, once merely an object of hesitation, had become a symbol of something far more dangerous: the growing paranoia that could tear a nation apart from within. In the provinces, the chaos escalated. One region, once considered a relative stronghold, erupted into violence seemingly overnight. Ambushes on military convoys, attacks on villages, and whispers of rebellion spread like wildfire. The government's communication networks faltered, messages failed to reach their destinations, and intelligence reports vanished as mysteriously as they appeared. The question gnawed at everyone. Was this the enemy striking, or was it the enemy within? Inside the capital, the tension was suffocating. Captain Ibrahim Traoré found himself isolated, his closest advisors divided, and the council splintered by fear and ambition. The very men who had once sworn loyalty began to show cracks. Secret meetings behind closed doors, furtive glances exchanged in hallways, and alliances formed in whispers. The Minister of Defense, once a staunch supporter of Traoré's vision, began to act with alarming independence. Late at night, he was seen slipping away for clandestine meetings, his motives obscured beneath layers of political intrigue. Rumors swirled that a coup was in motion, that the government's foundations were being undermined not by foreign enemies, but by those within the very circle of trust. Amid this mounting storm, a shadowy figure moved through the capital, slipping past guards and surveillance. Another envelope, bearing a different seal, was quietly delivered to a foreign embassy. A message sent beyond the nation's borders, hinting at betrayal on a scale that threatened to upend the entire government. Back in the war room, tension boiled over. Traoré's relationship with Commissaire Kaboré reached a breaking point. "Sir," Kaboré insisted during a tense meeting, "the letter you refuse to read could hold the key to stopping this madness. Every moment we delay, we lose control." But Traoré remained silent, torn between his instincts and the heavy weight of mistrust. To open the letter might mean exposing allies to suspicion, or confirming fears that could destroy the fragile trust that remained. Yet to ignore it was to gamble with the fate of his nation. Around them, the council fractured, loyalties shifted like sand, and the threat of betrayal loomed in every corner. The line between friend and foe blurred until it was nearly impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. As unrest spread, the nation teetered on the edge of collapse. In the midst of this turmoil, a question emerged from the shadows. Who was the true enemy? Was it the rebels in the north, the foreign powers watching from afar, or the traitors disguised as brothers and sisters within the capital? The unopened letter had become a mirror reflecting the deepest fears and fractures of a nation at war with itself. And in that reflection, Captain Traoré faced the most profound dilemma of his leadership. Because sometimes, the greatest danger is not the bullet or the bomb, but the whisper behind your back, the quiet betrayal that comes from within. What if the silence around the letter was louder than any gunfire? What if the truth inside it was a key that opened doors better left closed? In the days that followed, the capital was a city on edge. Military checkpoints sprang up overnight. Curfews were imposed. Citizens whispered of conspiracies, of governments collapsing, of histories repeating themselves in dark, inevitable cycles. Traoré's decision to hold back from reading the letter became a catalyst, igniting fear, suspicion, and a struggle for power that threatened to consume everything. This was the enemy within. The quiet threat lurking beneath the surface. The shadow that moves not with noise, but with silence. And as the night grew darker, one truth became clear. In the world of power, the loudest enemy is rarely the most dangerous. It is the one who whispers, then vanishes. It began in the silence of the night, a quiet stillness broken only by the distant cries of the wind and the faint hum of military vehicles moving through empty streets. A convoy, carrying one of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's closest allies, a man whose loyalty had been steadfast through years of turmoil, moved carefully across the rugged terrain of a troubled province. The roads, once familiar and secure, had become death traps, riddled with dangers both seen and unseen. Then, without warning, the ambush struck. Gunfire erupted in brutal bursts, shattering the night's calm. Explosions tore through the air. The convoy was overwhelmed with ruthless efficiency, an attack so precise, so devastating that no one survived to tell the tale. When the news reached the capital, it crashed over the war room like a tidal wave, sweeping away any remnants of hope or calm. The allies who had gathered to strategize and protect the fragile unity of the nation were left stunned, their faces pale and hearts heavy. This was not merely an act of violence, it was a statement. The nation's veins were bleeding, poisoned by betrayal. In that moment, the unopened letter, the one that had sat so long on Traoré's desk, suddenly became a symbol of lost opportunity, of warnings ignored, of silence mistaken for safety. But there was another darker shock waiting in the shadows. The letter was gone, vanished without a trace. The very document that could have revealed the impending threat, that might have prevented the bloodshed, was nowhere to be found. It was as if the truth itself had been erased. Panic set in. In the corridors of power, whispered accusations turned into open suspicion. Fingers pointed in every direction. Was this the work of enemies within the government, foreign agents, traitors lurking in the shadows? Traoré found himself grappling with a gnawing sense of betrayal deeper than any he had ever faced. How could the letter disappear? Who had taken it? And more importantly, why? Behind closed doors, his trusted advisor, Commissaire Caboret, scoured the intelligence networks, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that seemed to grow ever more complex. His searches uncovered secret meetings, unexplained absences, and conversations carried out in hushed tones in the dead of night. The picture that emerged was chilling. The betrayal was not just external. It was a wound inflicted from within, by those who once stood beside Traoré as brothers in arms. Amid the chaos, a symbolic scene unfolded. The letter passed hand to hand, a silent token in a deadly game of power and deception. Men who had sworn loyalty now became players in a shadowy dance, their actions hidden behind closed doors, their true intentions a mystery even to those who sought to uncover them. Some tried to burn evidence, hoping to erase the past and bury secrets forever. Others hoarded information, using it as leverage in a growing power struggle that threatened to consume the entire government. As Burkina Faso descended into lockdown, the streets emptied, soldiers took positions at every checkpoint, and the world watched with bated breath. Allies expressed concern through diplomatic channels, while adversaries seized the moment to tighten their grip, watching a nation's unraveling as if it were a slow-motion tragedy. In the face of this storm, Traoré was left to confront the harshest truth of all. His hesitation to read the letter had cost lives. His silence had allowed betrayal to flourish in the shadows. But the full truth remained elusive. The letter's contents, the warnings it carried, and the identity of the conspirators still lay hidden, waiting to be uncovered. In this crucible of loss and suspicion, Traoré faced a new reality. Leadership was no longer just about courage on the battlefield. It was about navigating a labyrinth of deceit, mistrust, and moral ambiguity. Because in this world, the greatest cost of all was not the lives lost, but the broken trust, the unraveling of a nation's soul. And as the dust settled, one question hung heavier than all others. Could the truth, once hidden, be found before it was too late? In the aftermath of devastation, when the echoes of gunfire had faded but the wounds remained raw, a fragile thread of hope began to weave itself through the darkness. Commissaire Traoré, once a figure of quiet pragmatism, became the unlikely keeper of secrets, a man driven not only by loyalty to Ibrahim Traoré, but by a desperate need to uncover the truth buried beneath layers of deception. Days after the ambush and the disappearance of the letter, Traoré was found dead under suspicious circumstances. Official reports claimed a sudden illness, but whispers told another story, a story of silenced voices and shadowy enemies who feared what his knowledge might reveal. Before his death, Traoré had kept a journal, a detailed chronicle of his suspicions and discoveries, written in coded entries and hidden in the depths of a forgotten safe house on the outskirts of the capital. When this journal surfaced, it became a beacon for those still fighting to piece together the tangled web of betrayal. Inside those pages lay clues, fragments of a conspiracy that reached deep into the heart of the government. Traoré's writings spoke of secret operatives, of meetings held in darkness, of whispered agreements that crossed borders and broke bonds. Most strikingly, the journal revealed that the traitor was not an external enemy, as many had feared, but someone who had once been called a brother by Traoré, a man whose loyalty had been sworn and trusted. The discovery sent shockwaves through the corridors of power. A trusted aide, a friend, a confidant, turned betrayer. The implications were staggering. This was not just political intrigue, it was a personal betrayal that cut to the core of leadership itself. With the journal in hand, Traoré and his remaining loyalists began to unravel the threads of deception, tracing the path of the traitor's machinations through secret communications and covert meetings. Each revelation peeled back another layer of the conspiracy, exposing how deeply the betrayal had infiltrated the government. In an abandoned safe house, long forgotten and left to decay, the original letter was finally found, still sealed, still unread. Its discovery was a moment suspended in time, heavy with irony and regret. The letter, which could have altered the course of events, had been hidden away in the shadows, a silent witness to the downfall it might have prevented. Within its folded pages lay a warning, a secret operative planted within Traoré's council, a saboteur working to dismantle the government from the inside. The letter spoke of plans to undermine Traoré's leadership, of alliances forged in the dark with foreign powers, and of an insidious plot to seize control through deception and violence. For Traoré, the revelation was a bitter pill, a painful reminder of the cost of hesitation, of the fragility of trust. But it was also a call to action. The truth had surfaced, but the battle was far from over, because in the world of shadows, exposing a traitor only invites more danger. The government's remaining loyalists prepared for a reckoning, setting traps and gathering evidence to confront the conspirators. But the price of betrayal was not only political, it was personal. The man once called brother now stood exposed, a figure of treachery that threatened to tear apart not just the government, but the very fabric of the nation. And as the truth came to light, so too did the realization that leadership in such times is a lonely, perilous path, one where trust is a currency spent sparingly, and loyalty is tested in the crucible of betrayal. The air was thick with tension, suffused with the heavy scent of betrayal as the capital braced itself for a reckoning long in the making. The nation, already battered by conflict and fractured by suspicion, stood on the precipice of its most profound trial yet. Within the shadowed halls where power whispered and alliances shifted like sand, Captain Ibrahim Traoré prepared to confront the invisible enemy who had betrayed not just a government, but the very soul of Burkina Faso. The man he once called brother, a trusted confidant, a pillar of his inner circle, now revealed as a serpent in the garden, moving with calculated malice and hidden agendas. This was no mere political rival. This was a profound betrayal born of ambition and greed, of loyalties sold to foreign interests and personal gain. The trap laid by Traoré was not one of violence alone, but of strategy and psychology. It was a test of loyalty, a crucible forged in fire and shadow, where truth and deception danced in a deadly game. The room where the confrontation unfolded was stark and cold, lit by a single overhead bulb that cast long, uneasy shadows across the faces of those gathered. Eyes flickered nervously, glances darted, and breath caught in throats. Traoré's voice broke the silence, steady and commanding, yet edged with the raw pain of betrayal. "Betrayal is not merely a crime against the laws of men," he declared. "It is a wound to the spirit of a people. It fractures the bonds that hold us together, that make us more than mere individuals. It tears at the fabric of trust, without which no nation can survive." A heavy pause settled over the room as the weight of his words sank in. The accused shifted in their seats, some defiant, others pale with guilt. The revelations that followed were staggering. Evidence laid bare not only the traitor's involvement but the sprawling network of conspirators, some known, many hidden. Meetings held under the cover of darkness, communications sent in code, alliances forged with foreign powers hungry for influence. Arrests rippled through the government, sweeping up those implicated in the plot. The process was swift but tumultuous. Friends turned on friends. Allies became suspects. The fragile trust within the leadership shattered like glass underfoot. Outside, the nation's pulse quickened. The streets, already tense from months of unrest, ignited into open protest. Crowds gathered, voices raised in anger and confusion. The public grappled with the dizzying truths revealed. The depth of deceit, the betrayal by those sworn to protect them. Images of the confrontation leaked, fueling conspiracy theories and distrust. Headlines screamed of treason and upheaval. The delicate balance between order and chaos threatened to collapse entirely. In response, Traoré addressed his people in a speech that resonated far beyond the borders of his troubled nation. "In war," he said, voice steady and resolute, "the loudest enemy is rarely the most dangerous. It is the one who whispers, then vanishes. The enemy within can do more harm than any force outside our walls. Vigilance, unity, and trust must be our shield and our sword." His words were both a warning and a plea, a call to recognize the dangers hidden in silence and to rebuild the fractured bonds of trust. But the cost of this confrontation was profound. Beyond the political fallout lay personal wounds, friends lost, alliances broken, and the crushing isolation of leadership in the face of betrayal. Traoré bore the burden of choices that no leader should ever have to make. The cost was paid not just in arrests and upheaval, but in the quiet moments of reflection, when the weight of solitude pressed down like a physical force. And yet, amid the rubble of broken trust and fractured unity, there was a flicker of resolve. Because leadership demands moving forward, even when the path is dark and uncertain. To heal a nation divided by suspicion requires more than strength. It requires humility, courage, and an unwavering commitment to truth. As the dust settled on the final confrontation, the nation faced a crossroads, scarred but standing, fractured but unbroken. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, once a man defined by decisive action on the battlefield, now understood the more complex battlefield of trust and betrayal in leadership. The silence that once protected had shattered, revealing painful truths and opening wounds that would take years to heal. His journey had been marked by impossible choices, and the weight of those choices was carried in every word spoken, every decision made. Because in the end, to lead is to bear the burden of silence, the cost of truth, and the relentless quest for justice in a world where loyalty is fragile and betrayal is often hidden in the quietest moments. The city now rests in uneasy silence, a fragile calm that masks the fractures beneath the surface. Captain Ibrahim Traoré walks the corridors of power alone, the echoes of the past haunting every step. The battles he once fought with bullets have given way to battles fought in shadows, in whispers, in silence. But these are no less brutal. The scars left behind are deeper, invisible to the eye, but etched into the very fabric of a nation's soul. He often finds himself in quiet moments, staring at the unopened letter that changed everything. Not because of what was written inside, but because of what it represented. A moment frozen in time, a choice delayed, a silence that allowed betrayal to thrive. What could have been if he had dared to break the seal sooner? Could lives have been saved? Could trust have been rebuilt before it shattered? Or was the silence inevitable, a protective barrier against truths too dangerous to face? Leadership, Traoré has learned, is a lonely path. It is a weight carried not just in actions, but in hesitation, not just in decisions made, but in decisions deferred. The burden is a heavy one, the knowledge that every choice ripples outward, touching the lives of millions in ways both seen and unseen. The cost is not only political, it is deeply personal. Trust, once broken, is difficult to mend. Betrayal leaves wounds that time cannot easily heal. And silence can be both shield and prison. It can protect and it can destroy. As Traoré contemplates the road ahead, a new envelope arrives, this time unmarked, unsealed, waiting to be opened. It is a haunting reminder that history is not linear, but cyclical, that the dilemmas of power repeat, generation after generation. The same tests of loyalty, the same battles of trust, the same agonizing choices return, like shadows that refuse to fade. What lies inside this new letter is unknown, yet it carries the weight of the past, the lessons learned and the warnings ignored. It is a symbol of the endless dance between truth and silence, between revelation and concealment. And here lies the greatest question of all. What would you do if you were in his place? Would you open the letter, confronting the unknown with courage and resolve, risking everything for a chance at truth? Or would you let history decide, placing your faith in silence and the hope that some secrets are better left unread? Because in a world ruled by influence and shadow, the truth is often the most dangerous secret of all. It threatens alliances, upends narratives, and exposes vulnerabilities. It can unite and it can divide. Traoré's story is not just his own. It is the story of every leader who has faced impossible choices, every nation caught between hope and despair, every human heart torn by doubt. As we close this chapter, we are left with questions rather than answers. Who holds the true power? The messenger who delivers the truth, the message itself, or the silence that surrounds them both? And what price do we pay when we choose silence over truth? The answers are not simple. They are tangled in the complexities of human nature, the imperfections of leadership, and the fragile bonds that hold societies together. This is a story without easy resolutions, a mirror reflecting the moral ambiguities that define us all. And as you listen, as you reflect, consider this. In the face of silence and uncertainty, what would you choose? Because sometimes the greatest courage is found not in the words we speak, but in the silence we break. The silence surrounding a single letter shaped the fate of a nation. But the question remains, was it silence that saved them, or silence that doomed them? What would you have done if you were in Captain Traoré's place? Would you have broken the seal, risking everything for the truth, or let history decide in silence? Share your thoughts below. Your voice matters in the conversation about trust, leadership, and the power of